la 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 la, ya la 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 la.
Shabbat Shalom. It's hard to believe that it's been a year since we last gathered together inside our sanctuary for Shabbat worship. But here we are. We've been through a lot collectively and as individuals over these past 12 months. One thing I'm grateful for is the gift of community that's helped us all navigate this challenging time. And I'm grateful for the gift of Shabbat. These moments where we can come together as a community, albeit physically distant, but very much together as a community, to celebrate Shabbat, to remind ourselves that we deserve the rest and the renewal that Shabbat brings. As we commemorate this milestone, let's move forward with a sense of hope. We know that more and more folks are getting vaccinated, and we're anxious for the day and hopeful for the day when we'll be able to be with one another physically once again. But until that day comes, we're lucky, truly lucky, that we can continue to find ways to creatively celebrate Shabbat, join together in community, and experience the rest and renewal that the Sabbath brings. May this Shabbat be filled with renewal, rest, peace, joy, and goodness for us all.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. We are ready to light our Shabbat candles. Please join us. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.
Royal Shrine, City of Kings, rise up and leave your ravaged state. You have dwelt long enough in the valley of tears. Now God will shower mercy on you. The Lecha Dodi, a hymn, indeed it's a poem, which we chant on Friday night. 3 stanzas are devoted to Shabbat, 6 stanzas devoted to the yearning of Jerusalem and redemption. Rise up. We have dwelt long enough in the valley of tears. We don't minimize the tears of this difficult year. We don't go on as if there has not been pain. For some, a pain of grievous loss. For others, great emotional upheaval. And yet, every Shabbat we hear these words, rise up. We have dwelt long enough in the valley of tears. And while we have chanted these words all this year, on this Shabbat the words ring especially true. There is reason for optimism, reason to embrace God's mercy. And in the later words of Lecha Dodi, Nismecha v'nagila, we will exult and we will sing for joy.
Shamor v'zahor b'dibur echad, hishmianu el miuchad, Adonai echad u'shemo echad, Hashem u'tiferet v'li tehila, Lecha Dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela, Lecha Dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Mikdosh melech ir melucha, kumitzi mitoch hafecha, בואי חלה, בואי חלה, לך דורי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה, לך דורי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה.
ברכו את אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד, המבורך, המבורך לעולם ועד.
שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto, Le'olam Va'ed.
באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, תורת תהילות, עושי פלא, עושי פלא. מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, תורת תהילות, עושי פלא, עושי פלא. מלכות בראו בניך, רוקי הים לפני משה ומרים, זה אלי אנו, אנו ויאמרו. Yai יפד אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל. שמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם, לדורותם ברית עולם. And on the seventh day, God ceased from work and was renewed. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat. Shabbat לדורותם ברית עולם, לדורותם ברית עולם.
There's a custom in our Jewish tradition to say a special blessing after you've gone through a life-threatening experience. It's called Benching Gomel, Birkat HaGomel. And we give thanks to God for giving us the gift of life, for the kindness that has enabled us to get to this very moment. And we're going to offer a new setting of this prayer for our entire community, because each and every one of us has had that feeling over this past year when maybe we were exposed to someone who later came down with a case of COVID-19. Someone close to us might have been impacted. We ourselves might have been impacted by this illness personally. And yet here we are, alive and able to take another breath, able to say thank you to God for the gift of life itself. Let's all give thanks for being granted another chance, another opportunity, another Shabbat.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hagomel lechayivim tovot shagmalani kol tov.
Baruch
Baruch
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam
hagomel
lechayavim tovot shagmalani
kol
tov.
May the one who's given me another day show me more kindness as I go on my way.
May the one who's given you another day show you more kindness as you go on your way.
May the one
May the
who's given me another
one who's given you another
day
day
show me more kindness
show you more kindness
as I go on my
as you
way.
go on your way.
Mi shegmar lechem tov, hu yigmar lechem kol tov selah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hagomel lechayivim tovot shagmalanu kol tov.
Can we look to the past and the future at the same time? As far as Judaism is concerned, the answer is yes. After all, the Amidah begins with a call on the God of Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and Rachel and Leah turned to the past. But it reaches its high points with the words, Umevi ge'ula livnei v'nehem, who brings redemption to their children's children. Redemption is a way of saying hope for the future. After a year-long pandemic, we understand the power of redemption and hope. We've held on to both of those feelings for so long, ever since we were confined to our homes. Ever since our kids were shut out of their schools, since our primary interaction with others was through a computer screen. We are on the cusp now of a pandemic redemption. When we'll open our homes to guests, we'll embrace redemption. When our children can return to full classrooms and sports competitions, we'll run to redemption. When we can once again sit shoulder to shoulder in worship, we'll feel redemption. When we can travel and explore the world, we'll discover redemption. When we can do our good work of volunteerism out in our communities, we'll bring redemption. And when we can gaze upon the unmasked face of another, we will look at redemption. So often that word ge'ula, redemption, rolls off our tongues without a second thought. But now, more than ever, this year above all, collectively, our hearts yearn for redemption. And so I invite you to either read the words that appear on your screen or close your eyes and recite your own prayers in your heart as we continue with the Amidah.
O guardian of life and liberty, may our nation always merit your protection. Teach us to give thanks for what we have by sharing it with those who are in need. Keep our eyes open to the wonders of creation and alert to the care of the earth. May we never be lazy in the work of peace. May we honor those who have died in defense of our ideals. Grant our leaders wisdom and forbearance. May they govern with justice and compassion. Help us to appreciate one another and to respect the many ways that we may serve you. May our homes be safe from affliction and strife, and our country be sound in body and spirit. Amen.
שבשמיים, צור ישראל וגואלו, ברך את מדינת ישראל, ראשית צמיחת גאולתנו. O Heavenly One, Protector and Redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, which marks the dawning of hope for all who seek peace. Shield it beneath the wings of your love. Spread over it the canopy of your peace. Send your light and truth to all who lead, advise, and defend, guiding them with your good counsel. Establish peace in the land and fullness of joy for all who dwell there. אבינו שבשמיים, צור ישראל וגואלו, אמן סלה, אמן סלה.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and thank you for joining us as we celebrate Shabbat. And of course, this week we mark what for most of us has been a year of COVID living. I can still remember a year ago, this particular Friday night, it was just your clergy in this empty sanctuary. And there were so many emotions and uncertainty wrapped up in that. And now, here we are a year later. And, I think many of you know, I just finished Shloshim, the first 30 days of mourning for my father. And there are so many milestones built into Jewish mourning. And in some ways, we are at what I have been thinking of as the Yartzeit, the first anniversary of the before times of life before COVID and what was. And so I'm so honored and thrilled that an old friend and a brilliant writer and editor is here to talk with me about this. So I'm going to introduce Gabby Berkner, who among other things is the co-founder of Modern Loss and the co-author and editor of their book, Modern Loss, which everyone should own. I always say it's for, I think they said this too, but it's for anyone who has grieved, is grieving, might be grieving, which, you know, is basically all of us. And so we're going to talk a little bit, not just about grieving and loss, but also about sort of lessons and hope. And so I'm going to sort of turn it over to you, Gabby, with the question of what do you think from your experience, from all of your work in this world? What do you think a year marks? What does it bring us? What might it change for us?
Right. So thank you so much, Sari, for having me. And thank you to your whole congregation. Yeah, now that we're coming up on a year, it was interesting. I read this piece last night about this hyper nostalgia people have for their last good day, their last carefree pre-pandemic memories. Maybe it is, a hug that they didn't have to think about. Maybe it's a last airline flight where they were just worrying about if there was going to be a screaming kid next to them. And trust me, I've had many screaming kids on my lap that are my children. So I get it. But so much of this past, so much of what we've experienced this past year has been analogous to grief. I mean, that feeling of that hyper nostalgia, the distinct before and after, the yearning for before times, like losing track of time, anxiety, fatigue. So for most of us, this year has been a year that has felt like grief. And more importantly, for literally millions, because if you think about the death toll in the US alone, it's 525,000 plus, and you think about the ripple effect of all the people who actually lost, who actually are grieving now. And those are just COVID deaths. So it's been a year that's felt like grief for so many, and it's been a year of actual grief for literally millions. And as you know, Sari, having recently experienced your own loss, that, it's not just people who died of COVID. It's everyone who lost someone during this time and didn't have that same freedom of movement, freedom to memorialize, ability to gather, ability to have all those communal supports that they might have otherwise had in before times. I think for a lot of people, their grief might be or feel somewhat stunted. And I think that is okay. So I think now, as we come up on this year, this is a time to hold space for our pain and to reflect on what we've been through that feels that analogous to grief feeling and the actual grief feeling for so many who've lost loved ones to COVID and to other causes during this time when they haven't had the supports they would have in other times. And I think going forward, it will be time, to hold space for those who lost someone in this past year, to do that memorializing in a way that they hadn't had the opportunity to in the past year, just because of the inability to gather, to travel, to even think clearly.
So one thing that I've been thinking about, and thank you for that, right? I think there is, and I've thought about it in other instances, but I think this year on such a grand scale of sort of what it means to have your own personal grief wrapped up in this sort of, it can't even say national, right? Like this worldwide, either I like sort of grief or facsimile thereof, right? Whether it's actual grief or we're all sort of wrestling with emotions that are really close to grief. Or maybe should actually be termed grief, but we don't necessarily do that. One thing that I was thinking of, I've been thinking a lot about time and then also like how we have all sort of lost track of some of it, but that this week there's this sort of interesting nexus in the Jewish calendar that we will finish the book of Exodus And the end of the book of Exodus is all about community. It's about the coming together to finish the building of the tabernacle. It's also what is known as Mivarchim HaChodesh, that we're going to welcome a new month. And precisely it is the month of Nisan, the month that ushers in Passover, which is all about sort of, rebirth and hope and new growth. And so just thinking about all of those sort of endings and beginnings wrapped up in here. And I think about the notion of Yartzeit, right? That ending of a year, which, it's not the end of grief, right? Like it's not like, oh, the clock turned over and like, there I go. But, maybe it's this time to sort of either plant or start to see those little like green, the little karpas, the little bits of green that can come up. And so I would love to hear from you, because I think you've thought and written and talked to so many people about it. Like, what do you think some of those little green bits are? Like, what are some lessons that we as humans, as Jews, learn from grief and from mourning?
Right. So interesting. I was in the car on the way to school, which opened very recently. And my son was talking about how they are writing in school about sort of about a year of COVID and about the sad things that have come out of it and some of the good things that come out of it. And I was so moved when he said, for all the good things, for all the family togetherness, for all the time we spent together, for all these new rituals, it's not, even that, it can't make up for all that has been lost. And he specifically mentioned all the people who have been lost. And I was just really moved by that he got it, that there is a tendency to talk about and want to see silver linings. But as so many of us who've lost loved ones who have lost loved ones either to COVID or to something else, we know that none of that makes up for the loss that we're feeling. So I don't know. I just was really taken with his observation. That said, I do believe in post-traumatic growth, as they say, because grief is this liminal space between destruction and like the reconstruction of our lives. And in that space, there's a lot of work that we need to do on ourselves. There's legacy work we want to do and need to do for our person. And that is holy time and holy work. Another, I love that you said the karpas, like another sort of thing that is hopeful about and what we can learn from grief is that it so often brings people together. And, that, as I said earlier, is something we haven't been able to do as much, although there has been a lot of innovation in the way that we've been able to show up for each other, even if we can't look each other in the eye. If we're looking screen to screen instead of eye to eye. We're giving, love emojis instead of hugs. But the way in which both in virtual setting and in real life that community brings people together, it teaches us how to show up for people. I think that is huge, that when people feel that they can be vulnerable and people show up to bear witness to that vulnerability, like just the most beautiful form of community can grow. I think grief also exposes love. It exposes vulnerability, and it exposes our resilience. And I think those are all really important things that we can learn from this experience that we never wanted to experience.
Beautiful. I really am taken by the idea of like grief teaches us how to show up. And I will say, this is sort of a love letter to the community. Like I have said so many times, I've been so struck by people's generosity, whether it's, the huge amounts of food and particularly carbs that we have to get out before Passover, right, that are in our freezer, And even like generosity of time, like people stopping and really like stopping in their lives to write the note or write the letter or send the love emoji, like that to me is a generosity. And I've really been struck by that. And like for me personally, hope that that's something that I now have learned and can bring, from my own. And so I think, and that language of like this experience we never wanted to have, which I think is true of grief, right? We know mortality is part of our life, right? We know that, and yet it's never welcome, right? We're never like, oh, like now I lost someone, and right? So like on a personal level, it's an experience we know we have to have, but don't want to. And I think certainly this particular year, right? Like none of us ever wanted it. I think none of us ever really imagined it, but now, can we start and I agree, right? It's not necessarily a silver lining. It's not like, oh, I'm so glad that happened so that, but rather this happened. Oh, and it turns out that, this started to grow for me or, I was able to leave this aside.
Exactly.
And, thinking ahead, not so far ahead to Passover, I think about that for me, one of the core post-traumatic growth of our experience in Egypt. And I also I'm very taken by that language and that sort of field of work. The Egyptian slavery was trauma and was generations of loss. But, what grows out of it is not just the freedom, but, the constant command that we have to, love the stranger, care for the stranger, know the stranger because we were strangers. And so like, to me, that return to, you said that grief reveals love. And I think, the idea of chesed, like loving kindness and empathy are maybe the ways that like love lives in the world. And so I want to thank you, Gabby, for joining us tonight, for sharing such beautiful thoughts. I want to thank everyone and wish you all a Shabbat Shalom and a Shabbat of healing and a Shabbat maybe of a little bit of karpas, a little bit of that springtime poking through. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thanks so much, Sari.
As we make Kiddush, we are reminded how Shabbat is sweet and how we must be grateful for all of our blessings. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho b'yava uvratzon hinchilanu, zikaron l'maseh v'reishit. Ki hu yom techila lemikrai kodesh, zecher litziat Mitzrayim. Ki vanu vacharta, veotanu kidashta, mikol hamim, v'shabbat kodshecha, be'ahava u'v'ratzon, hinchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh hashabat. L'chaim. Aleinu l'shabeach l'Adon hakol, latet gidula liyotzer breishit, shelo asanu kegoyei haratzot, velo samanu k'mishpechot האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
It can be difficult to put the number of lives our nation has lost due to COVID this past year into perspective. After all, the United States loses 675,000 lives each year to heart disease, another 600,000 to cancer. With numbers so vast, it can be difficult to put 500,000 more into perspective. Maybe that's why Jewish tradition discourages us from doing just that. In an episode recorded in the books of Samuel, King David is punished for attempting to take a census of the Israelites. People, our tradition cautions, are not numbers. They are unique and precious gifts whose existence brings limitless potential to the world. So how many is 500,000? It's just one. One life lost, one family grieving, one brilliant light exhausted, one limitless potential brought to an end. One is all that matters. So tonight, let us grieve together for the one we lost. If you're currently sitting Shiva or Shloshim, or in the first year of grieving for a parent, or commemorating a Yortzeit, the anniversary of a loved one's passing, we invite you to share the name of your loved ones with us as we rise for Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'yalma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayichon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayi d'chol Beit Yisrael, v'agala u'v'zman kariv v'yimru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam o'omei maya. Yitbarach, Yishtabach, Yitpoar, Yitramam, Yitnaseh. Yitadar, Yitaleh, Yitalal, Shmei D'Kudisha, B'richu. Le'ela, min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechamata, tamiran b'yalma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mamav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Zichronam livracha, we ask that the memory of everyone be a blessing to us now and always. Shalom.
Thank you once again for joining us. Thanks to our clergy team and our entire staff for making these services possible. Please come to Torah study tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Even if you've never joined us before, you are most welcome. Please give it a try. 10 a.m. Shabbat morning services, 7:30 p.m. Havdalah. Right around the corner, it's Passover. I can't believe it. It's here again. And spring is upon us. So keep your eyes open for all of the materials that we're creating to help support you as you enjoy your Passover Seders. You can join us for our online Seders here at the temple. We'll look forward to celebrating this most festive celebration of our freedom with you all. Thanks again and Shabbat Shalom.
Adon olam asher malach haydi di dai di di dai di dai di dai beterem kol yetzir nivra haydi di dai di di dai di dai di dai leet nasa vechevet zokol dai 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 di dai di dai di dai azay melech shmo nikra haydi 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 ve'acharei kichlot hakol levado yimelot nora vehu haya vehu oveh והוא יהיה בתפארה. לי, 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 לי. אדון עולם אשר מלך, היידי די 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 די. טרם כל יציר נברא, היידי די 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 די. לעת נשא וחפצו כל, היידי די 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 די. אזי מלך שמו נקרא, Hi die hi die die Beirado of Gidrochi Beishan Beira Beim Ruchi Geviati Adonai li Velo ira Lai 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 Adon Olam Asher Malach Haydi di dai di di dai di dai di dai Beterem kol yetzir nivra Haydi di dai di di dai di dai di dai Ve'et nasa vechevet zokol Haydi די 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 אז ein Melech schmo nikra Hai dai hai dai Adon olam asher malach Ay di 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 Beterem kol yetzir nivra Ay di 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 Veit nasav echevtzo kol Ay di 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 ay Az ein melech shmo nikra Ay di ay di